Hello, this is Victor Perez. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up NUKE and NUKE Studio to color manage a project using ACES. Let's start with NUKE X, which is the same version as the regular NUKE, but with other options. But in terms of color management, it's going to be exactly the same. So the first thing we have to do before starting comping or doing anything else with the software is to set up the color management. So for that, I'm going to the project settings here and to the color tab. In here, the first thing we have to do is to set up the color management. That by default is going to be NUKE, but we want to use the OpenColor.io, which is the color management platform that is supporting ACES. So OpenColor.io, OCO. Here you are. Now the config. We need to make sure that we are going to use the right ACES. So by default, even if we are in OpenColor.io, it's going to maintain the NUKE defaults. So now it's time to set up the right version for the color management. Remember that the version must be aligned with the other departments, so everybody must be using the same version of ACES, because not always the latest version is going to be available for all the softwares that are going to be involved in the pipeline. So it's something that everybody must agree before we start setting the project. So in here, because this is just an example, I'm going to use the latest available. I'm using NUKE 14.0 version 3 for this example. Later versions are going to have a later version of ACES available. Just make sure everybody is on the same page. So we have two options that are relevant in NUKE for the color management. One is the CG config that has been designed for animation, so a full CG project. And then we have the studio config that has been designed for integrating CG into live action or just working into live action, but it's more relative to cameras, okay? So we are going to use the studio config for these examples, as I'm going to have mixed informations in here, so you have different case scenarios. So this is going to be my version. Here it's telling me what is the version of the OCO configuration that we are using. Here in the default LUT settings is telling me what's the LUT that is going to be applied to the image depending on the kind of file. So the working space that in case of NUKE is going to be ACES CG, and the thumbnails, those little things, and the monitor out that we are going to be using to preview the comp in the viewer in an output monitor is going to be that one as well. So it's using sRGB. So ensure in here you set the right LUT for viewing the content in the right way for the monitor. So it needs to be set in the color space of the monitor or projector or TV, the display that you are using for that monitor out, okay? In this case, I'm assuming you are going to be using an sRGB, but remember, you need to make sure that option is right, okay? So then you have other options like 8-bit files, 16-bit files. I will suggest not to change anything that is in there because it's going to be quite standard for the pipeline. And the one that you are expected to change is actually the monitor out, because you want to make sure you are aligned in the image that you are displaying in that output monitor. Okay, so that is all you need to know in order to set up the project. In here you have just the LUTs to be visualized in there, but that is irrelevant for us at this very point. So now it is time to set up the read notes. So we have to apply to each image or each sequence the right input device transform. So we're going to start with this image, okay, which is a R3D file. Okay, so this is the camera raw from a red camera. So you can have different options depending on what's the material that you are ingesting in here. So make sure you are actually setting the right one. So the important is that you have in here the input transform. So you can go color spaces, inputs, red, and we can use, for instance, the red, white gamut RGB. Okay, so as you can see, now the colors that are set up in there are telling me that this is the right color space for this image. Okay, this is just for the ACES workflow that is relevant, so the input transform. But this is not overwriting anything that you have to do with the rest of the settings. Okay, it's just for getting the right color space first of all. Okay, so that is for ingesting from the camera. Before moving forward into other examples and other IDTs or input transform, I would like to show you the importance of the viewer process. In my current setup in here, recording this video, I have a sRGB monitor. So in here, in the viewer process, I have a sRGB display. So I'm sure the viewer and my monitor are aligned. So the information that you have in the viewer process is the ACES version 1.0 SDR video, which is the build that has been designed for SDR as opposite as HDR. But you have many other options that you can set up in here. Remember, I'm using the configuration for Studio, the one designed for CG integration. You have the other option that is specifically designed for CG. They are both parts of this ACES build. So in here, you have all the options available and you have to select the one that matches the color space of your monitor. As always, make sure you know what is the color space of your monitor that you are using, so you are sure the ODT is matching the one of your monitor. And in here is going to apply, as we have seen for the other softwares, any kind of LMT that you need. So make sure you are using the right LMT, so the look, and the right ODT, which is referring to the monitor. So the LMT is how you want to apply the look before the image is sent to the monitor. None of the configurations that you have in here are going to change the aspect of the image. It's just going to change how you visualize the images in the viewer in here. It's nothing related to the right node, so the images are always going to preserve the same values. I'm just going to demonstrate that by sampling that area, and now I'm going to select, for instance, this. See, it's changing the appearance, but the values are not changing. So that is very important because you can have different visualizations depending on the display that you are using, but still the image within the workspace of NUKE is going to be preserved. Okay, so those are different visualization LUTs. What about images that have been already processed to be displayed in ACES? Well, in here we have a legacy image. So this image that you have in here, or this sequence of images, has not been designed to be in ACES. So it was created for a non-ACES workflow. And this is actually an image coming from a film stock. So NUKE by default is interpreting that this DPX is actually coming from a log material, so it's already trying to set up the right information in here, but don't assume it's right. Probably is going to be right, but never assume the software knows, because it must be the artist that needs to ensure it's your responsibility. By the way, if you get a mistake at this stage, you continue working with the wrong IDT, it's very likely that by the time you discover the IDT is wrong, you need to start from scratch. So that's why I'm going to encourage you to ensure this is the right one. Okay, so in this case, it's telling you that it's using this default compositing log. If you are using film stocks, probably you can go here, ADX10, and that is going to set the right color space for this film stock. As you see, there is a difference between what it was before and what is the right one. So this is a lesson for you to never assume the software knows, because the software is just evaluating certain pieces of information, but the ultimate responsibility is yours. Of course, in a studio with a well-organized color management, they are going to set up everything, so as an artist, you don't need to care about that, but it's always good to know things are in the right place. So keep an eye on the IDT, the input transform. Okay, so this is what you need for the film stocks that are not in the ACES workflow. For this is a linear, okay? So NUKE right now is assuming this is a scene linear, but this scene linear is the ACES scene linear. But I just told you that this is not the ACES scene linear. So we are going to manually set up this into color spaces, utility, linear rec 709. In this case, it's not changing much, but it's actually different. See? The colors are actually changing. This is before and this is after. Because they are both linear, but the primaries are not defined by default in the NUKE RGB, so you have to emulate that in the way that those primaries are being imported. So when you are working with a non-ACES source of images, it's actually important that you keep an eye in the input transform. I know it's not an orthodox way of working, and now we are tending to use an ACES workflow that is end-to-end, but always keep an eye when things are not respecting the standards and the ACES compliant EXR sequences. That is what we are going to see next. So this is now the case scenario where we are going to receive the files already processed by another third-party software or even in NUKE Studio, but now they have been converted into ACES. But that's not all you need to do, so you cannot assume that everything is right. Why? Well, because the CG, and you have it in here a CG that has been generated in ACES, particularly in Maya and Arnold. So it's just applying the scene linear, and it is right. This is the scene linear. And by the way, what is the scene linear? So we are going to the Edit, Project Settings, and let's see what is the scene linear. So the scene linear is just going to use this. ACES CG. So when you see in here scene linear by default, if you haven't changed anything in there, it means that this image is being imported as ACES CG, which for this render is right. But this other image, that is camera footage, has not been created as ACES CG. Maybe this image was coming from another laboratory or something else, and it was encoded in an ACES compliant EXR. So this is not a scene linear. We know that the ACES compliant EXR is coming in ACES 2065-1, which is the AP0 primaries for the color space. So here you are. There is a slight difference, but trust me, that colorimetry difference is what makes the real deal when we are having the color management in the right way. Because you have to ensure everybody, everywhere, is looking at the same image. Because you don't want to receive a comment that someone is seeing the image slightly desaturated and is asking you to saturate, but that is not what is going to fix the image. So again, make sure everything is aligned. Footage that is coming from a ACES compliant sequence of EXRs must be in ACES 2065-1. CG that has been rendered into the right ACES way is going to be ACES CG. But always ensure that you are having the right color space for every kind of material. So this is raw material from the cameras. This is from a non-ACES workflow entering into an ACES color managed project. And this is for ACES compliant file with an ACES render. Okay, so we have in here all the different case scenarios that you can find. Maybe there are others, but the important thing is when you are ingesting, make sure you are setting in here the right input transform. At the same time, with the right nodes, when you want to export something, just make sure, for instance, we are going to call this test.exr. And if you want to create a ACES compliant, just make sure this right ACES compliant EXR is on, and that is going to generate a 16-bit half float with no compression. Okay, but this is not going to be set up by default, so don't assume that doing this is just going to set up everything you need for the ACES workflow. If you are exchanging in an ACES compliant EXR, you are expected to set the output transform into ACES interchange, this one. So those are the two things that you have to keep in mind when you are rendering ACES compliant in a color managed workflow with ACES, okay? Then, of course, other settings are not going to be overwriting, so whatever you need, you can apply it in here. But for color, those two things are the most important, okay? So this is for getting in and out the software. Then remember that you have other options in the OpenColor.io for color spaces, displays, and things, and this is more software related and how to operate the software, and I'm not going to discuss this in this video. Now, what I want to do is to see the settings in NUKE Studio. This is just a new project that I generated, and I just imported this image. So how do you set up the project to be in ACES? In NUKE Studio, we go to the project, edit settings, and here we are going to color management. And in here, we just need to make sure, by default, maybe you are going to have this, and you have to make sure you are in the right configuration that you want to use. Again, I'm going to use the studio config, okay? And remember, you can always use a custom build. So if you have the file that you can download, by the way, from the OpenColor.io website, you can go there and select the file, and then you are going to use the version that is going to be displayed in here, okay? So for this example, I'm just going to be simply with the studio configuration, okay? That's it. You have the options in here that are very similar to the previous that we saw in NUKE. As I said before, make sure the monitor out is rightly set to match the display that you are using for the output of your monitor, okay? The working space is going to be ACES CG, and remember that is right because we are using a CG pipeline. You don't need to use the other one because that is supposed to be for interchange. But if everything is in-house, you can keep the ACES CG while dealing with NUKE Studio and deploying for the other, the NUKE X. Okay, so everything is by default is right except the monitor out. Okay, so that's it. Another thing is how to manually set up the input transform to every clip that you have in here. And that is very simple. Just right click, set media input transform, and then in here you are going to set the right one depending on the input that you have. So in this case, we have that one. And that's all you need for NUKE Studio because everything is going to be relative to those settings, okay? It's very similar to DaVinci Resolve, but of course NUKE Studio has been designed for the post-production of visual effects and deploying the shots into NUKE X. This has been Victor Perez. Thanks for watching.